Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Sage Business Cloud webinar explaining how to set up Sage Payroll. So let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar today. So for our introduction, I'm going to run through some key features and benefits of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. I'm then going to explain how to access the software, and it's all done from within a browser. There's no software you need to install. And then we're going to run through a checklist of the information that you'll need to get started, whether you're setting up a new business, an existing payroll at the start of the tax year, or perhaps an existing payroll you're moving across mid-tax year. We're then going to take you through the steps to get everything set up. So we will start with the steps for setting up a new payroll, where we'll take a look at payday calendars and setting up employee records. And then we'll look at the options for moving to Sage Payroll. So you can either do this manually, entering the details yourself, or you can import an FPS file from your previous payroll software. So we'll take a closer look at the import option. We'll have a look at pensions and auto enrollment setup, and I've got some additional setup steps just to mention before we finish with about 5 minutes for Q&A at the end. Now, a quick note, if you have already completed the setup process, you may wish to sign up for our other webinar to learn how to process your payroll. So you can find these on sage.com if you follow the link on the current slide. You can get to that link if you download a copy of the slides from the handouts section or also in our useful links. So process your payroll tells you how to actually use the software and process a pay run. This one focuses on getting everything set up. So let's move straight on to our introduction, where I'm going to quickly list off a few of the key features and benefits of the Sage Business Cloud Payroll software. So number one, it is completely cloud-based. So you can access it through a browser. There's nothing for you to install, and you can access it anywhere from any device with an internet connection. So that could be a PC in the office, it could be a laptop, it could even be a tablet, an iPad, or anything like that. Now with Sage Payroll, you do have the option of hosting your pay slips online so that employees can access those documents in an app or in a secure online portal. There are also pay slip options if you prefer to print or email. We'll show you some of those settings in the demo. We have auto enrollment and pensions features, which will ensure that anyone that meets the criteria to be auto enrolled is put into your pension scheme. And then you've got options for managing opt-outs and things like that. You can integrate directly with Sage Accounting. So if you use our Sage Business Cloud Accounting software, your payroll information can be set up to transfer automatically into your accounts. You have the option of setting up additional users if required, if there's more than one of you processing the payroll that needs access to the software. And we have plenty of help and support available 24/7. I'll explain the easiest ways to find help as we go through a quick product tour. So those are some of the key features. I would also mention that you're in complete control of your subscription. So with Sage Business Cloud, you can go to the Manage Business Account section within the software and go to your subscription and invoices. And then should you need to, you can change the number of employees included in your subscription, either moving that up or down through the range from 5 all the way up to 100 employees. So it's software that grows with you, and you're just subscribing to the number of employees you actually need. So quick look at how to access Sage Payroll. As I said, it's all done from within your browser. So the easiest way to sign in is to go to www.sage.com, then look for the login option in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and then under My Products, click Sage Business Cloud, Sage 1, Accounting and Payroll. You'll then just need to enter the email address and password that you used to set up your Sage Business Cloud account, and then you will be in to your payroll software, or if you have accounting and payroll, you'll be able to switch between the two products by clicking on the little arrow in the top left corner. So let's now take a look at Sage Payroll in action. I'm just going to bring it up on screen for you. This is a payroll that I've already set up. So this is the stage that we're aiming to get you to following the steps in today's webinar, but I wanted to give you a very quick look around and show you how you can access our in-product help options. So the first thing you'll see is a summary, a payroll summary, and this is the view once you've completed the setup screen. So it shows you what your next pay runs are. In my case, it'll be my month 1 pay run on the 25th of April. The status of your recent RTI submissions or anything that's coming up in the next few days. You've got auto enrolment and pension status. And then there's a little pop-up down here with more information about the online payslips and P60s feature that you can use to give your employees access to their documents that way. You've then got various other tabs that you would use. So pay runs is where you would go to actually run a payroll and also to look back at any completed payrolls that you've processed in the past. The employees section is where you'll manage your employee records. So it's where you would come if you take on a new employee to set them up, or where you would come to make them a leaver if it's their last pay run with you. You've got an area to manage your pension schemes. So I've just set up the one in this example, but you can have multiple schemes if you need to. You can run various pension reports here towards the bottom. And then you have that section dedicated to payroll year end. So we have just finished the 21 to 22 tax year. You can see some of the tasks involved in the year end process, which I've already completed. And when it comes to this time next year, we'll be able to run the same tasks for 2022 to 23. You've then got a selection of reports that you can run for any completed periods. So a list of these reports that you can go into, and then all of your main settings are found from the settings tab. I'll be pointing some of these out during the demos today. So this is a payroll that's set up and ready to go. If you do need any help while using the software, you might have noticed these help icons that appear at various places. So that will take you to the specific help page for the area that you're looking at. In this case, it's payroll settings. You've also got the main help option here at the top, which will take you to our help center, where you can do a search for keywords, or you can use the menu options here on the left-hand side, for example, with help with setup, setting up your company, etc. And then if you do need further support from our support team, from any article on our help center, just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link here to get in touch. And then from here, just choose that you're a customer needing help with Business Cloud Payroll, and you get your 3 support options just underneath. So that's just a quick tour of the software and what it looks like once it's all set up. And what we're going to go through before I show you those setup steps is a list of the information that you will need to get your payroll up and running. So remember, you can download the handouts if you want a copy of this checklist, and the information you need will depend on whether you're setting up a brand new business, taking on their very first employee, or whether you're an existing payroll, starting to use Sage at the start of a tax year or mid-tax year. So in the demos today, we are going to focus on start of tax year, as we are very near the start of the tax year right now. But if you were setting up mid-tax year, there'd be additional information you need to enter in terms of opening balances, which I will mention when we take a look at those options. So first of all, you'll need some employer details, including your PAYE reference and accounts office reference. You'll need the government gateway, user ID and password used for PAYE online services. You'll need to know your reporting frequency to HMRC. That will be monthly or quarterly, and the method you use to pay your tax and national insurance to them. And then if you were moving over mid-tax year, you'll need to know the last P32 reporting period and any employment allowance you've claimed. Now, in terms of employee details, you'll need their personal details, such as names, addresses, date of birth, gender, and national insurance number. For a brand new business, there would be a P45 or starter checklist, formerly a P46. Or if you're moving an existing payroll across mid-tax year, you'll need the opening balances, or if it's the start of the tax year, you'll just need the RTI Pay ID, which you should be able to get from your previous software. Now, a lot of these details can be exported as part of an FPS file. So we're going to show you how you can import some of these details later on in the demo. Finally, on this checklist, you'll need some pension scheme settings. So information from your provider, including references, names of groups or payment sources. You'll need to know how the contributions are calculated and whether those are taken before or after tax. And finally, you'll need your staging date or duty start date for automatic enrolment. So that's what you're going to need. We're now going to show you the setup steps. So I've broken this down into 4 key tasks. So when you're setting up a payroll, you'll start by entering your employer details. You'll then set up a payday calendar. You'll enter or check the employee details that you've imported, and then you'll set up your pensions and, where applicable, assign those to your employees. So these steps are common to new businesses creating their very first payroll or existing businesses that are moving across to Sage. But if you were moving your payroll in the middle of a tax year, you would also need some opening balances. So for the employer, you would need to know any statutory payment or employment allowance values on your P32 report. And for the employee, you'll need their year-to-date information, which you typically find on a P11 report. So that's not needed if you're setting up at the start of a tax year, which I expect some of you here probably are, but I thought I'd mention it as it is something that is required if you're going to be doing this a couple of months down the line. So let's just start with where you would enter the employer details. So if you've already been through the initial setup, you will have been asked for your PAYE reference and accounts office reference at the time, but you can check these details by going to the Settings tab at the top of the screen and then clicking on Payroll Settings. And you just need to make sure that your PAYE reference and accounts office reference has been entered correctly, especially if you'll be importing your employee details, as it will need to match the file that you are importing. So I'll point out that area when we go into our first demo. Having entered those initial employer details, you would then see the Welcome to Payroll wizard, which gives you 3 different ways of setting up your payroll. So the first one on that list is to manually migrate, but you would only use that if you're moving from another payroll provider partway through a tax year and you'd like to enter all of your employee details and opening balances manually. So probably more suited to a smaller payroll or where you don't have an FPS file you can import. The second option is to import the employee details. So this can be done from an SPS file from your previous software at any time in the tax year. So we're going to show you setting up at the start of a tax year in the demo. Could also be done mid-tax year, where it would bring in the year-to-date values as well. And then the third option, the new company option, can be used when taking on your very first employee, or if you're migrating an existing payroll at the start of a tax year and you prefer to do it manually, because you don't need any of the opening balances that you would enter in the manually migrate option. So it's time for another demo. We're going to show you how to set up a new payroll to start with. So we're going to be using the option at the bottom of the Welcome to Payroll wizard. As I say, this is suitable if you're taking on your very first employee or migrating an existing payroll at the start of the tax year. And with this option, there are no opening balances required. So this is the payroll that I've just set up. So I'm on the initial setup screens where I'm going to enter my PAYE reference and accounts office reference. Also confirming my payment frequency to HMRC and payment method, which is monthly and bank transfer in this example. And once you've been through that initial setup wizard, you'll get to a page that looks something like this. And this gives you the 3 options to begin the setup. So new company is the first one we're going to take a look at, as this is the simplest option. If I click onto new company here at the bottom, you'll see there are 2 steps we need to complete. So the first is to set up our employee pay days, and the second is to add the employees to payroll. So you would click on the link in each of these steps to get to the relevant area in Sage Payroll, and this is where you would set up your payday calendar. So 4 different pay frequencies: weekly, monthly, 2 weekly, or 4 weekly. In this example, I'm going to set up a monthly calendar. So I'm going to click on this option here. And from here, I just need to select the day of the month that I pay my employees, whether that's the same day of the month or the last day of the month. I then need to choose the specific day that the employees are being paid. So in this case, it's the 25th of each month, and then the first pay run that I'll be running in Sage Payroll. So in this case, it is April 2022. So I'm just going to click on to save. And as you can see from here, there's an option to view the pay calendar. So this is going to allow you to see all of your upcoming pay dates. So in this case, it's the 25th of the month, each month for the rest of the tax year. Now, if you need to, you can set up further pay calendars, and you can get back to the pay calendars from settings and then payday settings. So if you have weekly employees as well, you could set up a weekly calendar. And when you're done, if you just return back to the summary and go back into the new company option, you'll see that the first step is complete. And all you then need to do is to add your employees to payroll. So I'm going to click on that second step. So this takes us to the employees area in Sage Payroll, and you would use the create employee option to set up the employee details. So if I click on to create employee, everything with a star is mandatory. So you would just go ahead and start entering the details. Just going to put some of the mandatory details in now. When it comes to address lines, we'd recommend that you use both of them, as certain pension providers do require both of those fields to be completed. And then down in the employment details, we can set up the pay cycle, which will be monthly for this employee, and then we can complete the other information. Now, the RTI pay ID, if you're moving from another payroll at the start of the tax year, you should match this up with the RTI pay ID you used in your previous software, if that information is available. If you leave it blank, it will automatically generate one, which is, guess what you would do for a brand new company. You then put the employee's start date in. So if you're taking them on for the first time, it's the date that you employed them, or if you're moving from another payroll system, it's the original start date, which is what I'm going to do. And then you can set the payment method, indicate if they're a director, in which case you would enter directorship details, and then you can set their pay document preferences. So this would be whether you want to print or email their pay slips. So I'm going to leave it as print. And then just at the bottom here, for the starting date basis, you would choose existing employee if you're manually moving an existing payroll at the start of a tax year, or if you're a new business, you would either enter P45 or P46 details for that particular employee. So I'm just going to choose existing, confirm the NI category and tax code, and then I can save that employee record. And you would just then repeat that process for any other employees that you need to set up. So create employee, and that will then add them to that list. Now, because we've set up an employee record, if I go back to the summary tab, you'll see that my payroll summary is starting to take shape, showing me my next pay date. So I'm now ready to kind of complete the setup by setting up my pensions, which we will cover later on in the demo. So those are the setup steps for a new payroll. Let's just recap the 2 steps we completed. So it was the payday calendar first, where we choose the pay frequency, then the day of the week or month that the employees are paid. You can click View Pay Calendar to check the upcoming pay dates for the current tax year. You can have as many of these calendars as you need. And then we created the employee details. So personal details, make sure you're always entering their full names as it appears on any identity documents, contact details, employment details, directorship if applicable, and then either the previous tax details for a brand new employee or selecting the fact that they are existing. So I wanted to start with that option because it is the simpler option of the three. But I would imagine for many of you, you are moving over to Sage Payroll and you're perhaps doing this at the start of a tax year, or you might be planning to do it mid-tax year. So we're going to take a look at the other options, and I'll also point out where you can enter opening balances if required. So first thing I'm going to talk about is the manually migrate option. So this is where you're moving from another provider partway through a tax year, and you are happy to enter the employee details and the opening balances manually. So in this demo, you'll see that it takes us through a wizard. So I'm just going to set up one employee for the demo just to keep things short and sweet. And we'll also maybe take a look at some of the reports that you might need to help with those opening balances. So back into the demo, I'm actually going to reset this data. So you can actually start again. If you've been tinkering, but you haven't actually run any payrolls, you can go to settings, data management, and you can reset your data. So I'm going to do just that so that I can start this again for you, and then we'll choose the option this time to manually migrate our payroll. So same three setup options that we saw before. This time I'm going to choose manually migrate. First thing we need to do is to set up our pay calendar. So we've already confirmed that we pay HMRC monthly, and we do that by bank transfer. And for this demo, we're planning to move over in June. So the last completed reporting period in our old software, I'm going to put down as month 2, which is May. So the first pay run in this payroll will be the start of the next reporting period. I would then set up the calendars. In my case, it's just a monthly calendar where I'm paying the same day of the month on the 25th. I'm not going to avoid the public holidays and weekends because I always want to record the pay date as the 25th. So I have cleared that box. And then if you go on to the next step, you then get to a section where you can add your employees. So as well as the personal details that we saw earlier, you'll also see there's a tab there for opening balances. So I'm just going to pop some very basic details in for this particular employee. On the tax details, we can put the pay cycle, original start date for this employee, and their pay method. We'll pop the tax code in and NI category, and you'll see that RTI Pay ID is a mandatory field. So you should be able to get that from your old payroll software, or if you're importing the details, it will come across automatically. So I'm just going to stick a reference in to that field. And then you have the opening balances tab. So you wouldn't fill this in if you're at the start of a tax year. You would use the other method to create a new company if you're doing it manually. But if you wait until partway through the tax year, from the opening balances, you would indicate that the employee has been paid this tax year, and then you would enter their PAYE and national insurance details. Now, the best place to find these are from P11 reports from your previous software, and I'll show you what they look like on some of the next slides. And if applicable, director details, if they're a director, statutory payments they've received this tax year, student loan repayments this tax year, and if they happen to have had another employer in the current tax year, you would put their P45 or P46 details in. So just to show you that section, I'm not going to fill any of the figures in. but that sets up the first employee. You can then repeat the steps to add any other employees. But what I would say is once you're at this point, you do need to complete step 3 to actually save these employee details. So even if you plan to add more employees a little bit later on, do make sure you go through to next and click submit, which then takes you to the next steps checklist, because that way you've saved the employee details that you've entered. If you did sort of click away from that screen without confirming, it would lose any of the information that you've already entered. So it then tells you what your next steps are. So it's migrating statutory payment values and employment allowance values, which you would all find from a P32 report, checking working patterns, entering absences, and setting up student loan deductions where applicable. So I'm just going to click done. And again, you can see the payroll summary has started to build up. If you wanted to go back and add more employees before your first pay run, you just click on this link at the top and then click review or edit your migrated data. And that'll take you back into the same wizard. What we could then do is add further employees with their opening balances as well. So just to recap that process before we look at importing, this is used partway through a tax year, so may not be relevant to some of you here today. Employee details and opening balances are entered manually. This is a P11 report. So this is just an illustration of where you would get some of the information for the PAYE details and NIC details for the current tax year. And then when it comes to migrating the employer values, you take a look at your P32 report to see if there's any statutory pay recovered in the tax year. And if you're claiming employment allowance, you'd also need to enter the amount of the allowance you've claimed so far in the tax year so that you can continue claiming the correct amount moving forward in your new software. So moving on next to the import option. So we've seen the 2 manual options. The import employees option is a great time saver, and it should also help avoid mistakes, because you'd actually take a file from your previous software and you would import that containing all of the employee details and, if applicable, year-to-date values, and that will automatically set up the employee records for you and enter the opening balances. Now, what I would say at this time of year, if you're setting up at the start of a tax year, you could still do the import from your previous software, but you will not need the opening balances. It's only if you're planning to start using Sage Payroll mid-tax year that you would need to bring in the latest opening balances from the latest FPS file. So I'm going to give you another demo for this one. So let's just jump back to Sage Payroll. Again, I'm going to reset my data. Check into from the data management section because I haven't processed any payrolls. Just put my company details back in. And that will take us back to our Welcome to Payroll wizard. So this time I'm going to import some employees, and I've actually exported an FPS file from my previous payroll software. So that's sitting there on my desktop, and that contains the employee details and also the year-to-date values from the period that that FPS was sent. But because I'm moving over at the start of the tax year, I'm only going to import the employee details, and I'll point that option out when we come to it. So I'm going to click on Import Existing Employees, and you'll see there's a 3-step process. The first step is just an explanation of how you do this. It explains what an FPS file is, and it also shows you where to find your FPS file if you've been using a Sage desktop payroll product or for other payroll providers. On the next stage, you would browse to the FPS file. So mine is on my desktop. I would select it and click open. It'll then validate that the employer details in that FPS match the employer details that you've entered in your payroll, which lucky for me it does. And if I click onto next, it then shows you the employee details that are about to be imported. So I had 2 employees on my previous payroll. They were both paid monthly. So they were both in the monthly FPS file that I exported. But because we're coming over at the start of a tax year, we're going to select this option at the bottom to import only employee personal details. And as it explains there, none of the year-to-date values will be imported. And we're using this option because we're starting a new tax year. We're importing the FPS from month 12 in the previous year. So I've got that box ticked for this example. I will click on to confirm and then click complete import. And that then takes me to a checklist, which will help me to complete the setup. Now, if you did happen to have different pay frequencies and you had more than one FPS file that you wanted to import, you can begin the import process again, either by following this link here at the bottom or by going to the settings and clicking import FPS file. Take you back to that same import wizard. But if I just go back to my summary, I only have monthly paid employees, so I'm just going to work through these steps to complete the setup. So these will be quite familiar now. Setting up the paydays. Clicking on this link takes you to the payday calendar settings. So as per my previous demos, I pay monthly on the 25th of the month. My first pay run is going to be April 2022 in this new tax year. I'm going to go ahead and save that payday calendar. And then to return to the checklist, I just go back to the summary. You can see the summary starts to build up and we can mark that first step as complete. Now, next up is to confirm the working patterns, but we also will need to add some of the detail that wasn't imported from our FPS file. And we can see there's a warning here that 2 employees require attention. So if I click on Edit Employees, or I can click directly onto the Employees tab here at the top, you'll see both of these imported employees require attention. And if I click on the first one, it actually tells me that the start date is required. So that hasn't come across from the import. And if I just click Edit and scroll down, I can add in the original start date for this employee just in the relevant field. It's brought most of the other details in, RTI pay ID, tax code, NI category, personal details. Hasn't brought the address in. So again, probably take this opportunity to add the missing address lines like so. And if you're happy with the details that you've just entered, you click on to save, and then you can repeat these steps for the other employees. So I'm going to pop the start date in for this employee as well. Plus their address. And if I click on to save, we then have 2 employees with no issues, which is always good. And then if I wanted to check the working patterns, I can go back to the employee record and click on the working pattern tab. The default pattern is Monday to Friday. It's only used for SSP purposes. So if you need to change the working pattern to something custom, click onto Edit. Then you can choose one of the custom options from here. But I'm happy that both of my employees have a Monday to Friday working pattern. So coming back to the summary, I can tick off that second step as I've now confirmed the working patterns. The third one here, to set up student loan deductions, is only applicable if you have any employees who are repaying an active student loan. It takes you to the payments and deductions settings, where you could, if needed, create a deduction for a student loan, choosing the relevant plan type, and that can then be added to the employee's payslip when you do a pay run. I don't need to do it in the demo, so I'm just going to tick that step and mark it as complete. And the final steps are all around setting up pensions. which I'm going to cover in the next part of the webinar. So let's take a quick breather and recap the import process for you. So this is used to import an FPS file from your previous software. It can be done at any time in the tax year. Automatically creates the employee records, and if you're moving mid-tax year, the opening balances. Because we were setting up at the start of the year, we ticked the box to say that we only wanted the personal details. After import, it'll then give you a checklist. Ours looks slightly different to this one because we were setting up at the start of a year, but you would work through this checklist to create your payday calendar, check the employee details and enter additional information such as start dates and addresses. The P45 details and employer values you'd only need to enter if you are setting up mid-tax year. You get that information from your P32 report or your P11s. And then the final two steps on there, setting up and assigning pension schemes, is what we're going to cover next. So auto enrolment and pensions was the kind of fourth stage in that flow chart that I showed you earlier. If you're setting up for an existing payroll, so if you've either imported the details or you use the manually migrate option, there are 3 steps involved. You'll need to enter your staging or duty start date for auto enrolment. So you might be able to find that in your old payroll software. If you're not sure what it is, look for any communications from the pensions regulator, or if you contact the pensions regulator, they will be able to clarify what that was. You need to add your pension scheme details. And then the third step will be to assign your employees to the pension. So let's take a look at that setup as a quick demo. So because I'm working through a checklist, I could click on this link to set up employer pensions, or I can go to the pensions tab here at the top. And the first step is to enter our staging or duty start date. So it depends how long you've been an employer. You were either given a staging date at some point between 2012 and 2018, when your auto enrolment duties would have took effect. Or if you're a more recent employer, your duty start date would have been the day that you took on your first employee. So in this example, my duty start date was the 1st of January 2020, and that was the date that I took on the first employee. The enrolment status is that auto enrolment is set up. We're moving from another payroll, so auto enrolment itself is set up, and we'd click on to save, and it then tells us that our pension scheme can now be added. So you would do this by clicking on add a new pension, and then there are 4 specific providers where you can enter specific settings for them: Nest, Now Pensions, People's Pension, or Smart Pension. Or you can enter custom pension settings for any other provider that isn't one of those first 4. Now note that there are help options for any of these links that you choose. I'm going to choose Nest Corporation for this one, and this help will tell us the detail that we need to set up a Nest pension. But it just involves entering our employer reference, setting up our group, sometimes known as a pension plan, and in the case of Nest, adding our payment source. So you'll have already set these up with your pension provider. We're just replicating the details and the settings in our payroll. So for this first one, we're going to add a group. And if you are with Nest, you'll have given it a specific name, and the group name in your payroll needs to exactly match. So same capital letters, same spaces if you've got spaces in the name. You can then confirm if your contributions are deducted before or after tax. If you're not sure, check with the pension provider. You can enter the deduction details. So in my case, the employer is contributing 3% and the employee is contributing 5%. And then on the next step, we just need to confirm what earnings are pensionable. So typically it would either be qualifying earnings, sometimes known as banded earnings. So it's earnings between the government's lower and upper threshold of qualifying earnings, or you would choose pensionable pay if it's specific pay elements that would be used in pension calculations. For example, if basic was pensionable, but perhaps overtime and bonuses were not. Now in this example, I'm choosing qualifying earnings. Also going to record the date that I usually make payments to Nest, 22nd of the month in this example, and this is going to be set up as our default plan. It's the only pension scheme that this business uses. So I'd click onto save, and that sets up the group or the pension plan with all of the pension settings. We will also add our payment source. Again, it needs to exactly match the source that you set up on your Nest online portal. And then we can tick the box, agreeing to the terms, and we can then click on to save. So that has now been added. We can tick the box to say that that pension scheme qualifies. And if we take a look at the pensions tab now, we can edit those pension settings at any time, and we could add additional pensions should we need to. So heading back to the summary, that was my penultimate step, setting up the pensions. The last one, because we're an existing business, is assigning employees to the pension plan. So if they're in the pension scheme, you would need to record when they joined. If they're not in the scheme, because they've perhaps opted out or left, you can record that status as well. So this link takes you to the employees section. And then for each employee, just to complete the part of the setup, you would go to Workplace Pensions, edit the details, choose the relevant status, and there is a definition of each status just underneath. So this employee was enrolled into the pension, and we can set the original enrolment date. So again, refer back to your previous payroll records for that information. Make sure you're happy with the provider details. So I'll do the same for my second employee, but let's imagine that this employee actually opted out of the pension when they were enrolled originally. So I would set them to opted out. You put the opt-out date in, and we can click on to save. And by doing that, by marking them as opted out, it means they won't get auto-enrolled into the pension scheme when we start using Sage Payroll. So back over to the summary, I can tick off that final step, and I am pretty much ready to go. There's some additional setup steps which I'll run through before we finish, but that is the bulk of the setup done. So in that demo, you've seen how it works for an existing payroll. If you chose the new company option, so if you are a brand new business, or you chose new company because you wanted to set up manually at the start of the tax year, the setup is slightly different. You'll still need to confirm your staging or duty start date. You'll then need to work through a preparation checklist. So much of this is just ticking boxes to say that you've nominated a pensions contact and assessed your workforce. You'll still need to add the new pension as part of that process. And once you've ticked off all of the steps in the preparation checklist, your employees will then be enrolled into the pension on your first pay run. And if required, you could opt them out at that point if they had previously opted out. So with pensions done, it's just a few additional setup steps that I'd like to run you through. And then, as I say, we should have some time at the end to pick up any of your final questions. So first thing I'll mention, an additional setup is the employment allowance. So this is a government scheme where eligible employers can claim back now up to £5,000 each tax year by reducing their employer national insurance contributions when paying HMRC. You are typically eligible if your employer national insurance contributions for the previous tax year were £100,000 or less. But you can check the eligibility in both our help files and the gov.uk website. You do need to submit a claim for each tax year that you're eligible. And when you switch to Sage Payroll from previous software, even if you've claimed in your previous software, you'll still need to record that claim in the new software and at the start of each new tax year where you are eligible. So it was previously £4,000 a year. It's gone up from the 6th of April to £5,000 per tax year moving forward. So I'll just show you how to run through that setup. It's dead straightforward. So from your payroll summary, you've got the button to record an employment allowance claim. So you'll need to say whether state aid rules apply to you, which they generally would if you make or sell goods or services, and what industry sector applies to you. So we're in the industrial sector because we don't fall into any of the first three. And then you do a one-off submission at the start of the year. So this is where you'd need your user ID and password for the government gateway, which you can store for future use. And that then gets submitted to HMRC, which informs them that you'll be claiming the employment allowance for this new tax year. So you only need to apply once, either when you switch or at the start of each tax year. And then at the end of the month, when you record your payment to HMRC, your P32 report will show the amount that you've claimed. So this is what a P32 looks like. This is for the previous tax year, so it still shows the £4,000 annual limit, but it will keep a track of how much you've claimed each period, and it will reduce the payment due accordingly. Next up, if required, you can set up additional users for your Sage Payroll. So if you need cover when you're going to be away, or you have other people that need access to the payroll information, you can invite them from the Manage Users area in your settings. The only access level you can give to payroll is full access or no access, so you can't give them sort of partial access to certain employees. But as I say, it is handy if someone else is going to log in and run the payroll in your absence. So you'll find more information on user management from our help files. And then a couple of other additional setup steps. We cover some of these in our processing payroll webinar. But in advance of your first payroll, you might want to choose a payslip template for printed or emailed payslips. Alternatively, you could run through the online payslip setup. It's really simple. And then your employees will be invited to access their payslips either in a mobile app or through an online portal. And payment and deductions can be set up in advance if you've got different payment descriptions you want to use, maybe basic overtime, commission, etc. You can set them up so that they're ready to select when you run your first payroll. As I say, we do cover that in more detail in our other webinar. And that brings us to the end of the presentation today. So I am going to quickly run through some further support, but please do use this opportunity to submit any questions that you might want us to answer from the Q&A option on the right-hand side of the screen, as we'll have time to send some answers through after this. So your next steps in terms of webinars from this, leading on from this one, is our Process Your Payroll webinar. So you'll see how to run a payroll start to finish in the new software. We also answer some frequently asked questions in that one as well. So you can sign up at sage.com from the link on screen and also from the links in your handouts. These are also available to view on demand. So should you wish to watch a recording, if you can't make the live session, you've got that option as well. We also have interactive Sage Payroll training in Sage University. This again is completely free to access. You would just need to create a profile at sageu.com, and then you can use this direct link to find the Sage Payroll learning path. So courses on payroll fundamentals, getting set up, running your first pay run, etc. The online help center we had a look at in the product tour. So whenever you see the question mark icon, that'll take you to the relevant help center page, or you've got the help option at the top of your software to access at any time. So use the search bar or navigate the menus on the left-hand side. And if you do need further support, scroll to the bottom of any help page, click on Get in Touch, and then you'll find the options to get in touch with our support team. Thanks once again for joining us at the webinar. Do stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars soon. Goodbye for now.